We have one more session before we break for lunch. Let's shift our focus here to abuse and juvenile justice homes. We have with us Mr. Suhas Chakma, who's the director of Asian Center for Human Rights and serves as a member of the core group of NGOs of the National Human Rights Commission. He's an expert in international human rights standards and procedures and the author of several reports on rights of the child. Significant among his many writings is the 56-page report titled India's Hellholes: Child Sexual Assault in Juvenile Justice Homes, which highlights 39 emblematic cases of systematic and often repeated sexual assault on children in juvenile justice homes. Mr. Suhas Chakma, I welcome you on stage.
Thank you, the foundation, Janvi and other colleagues of the foundation. I work on human rights issues. Child rights issues were actually not initial focus of us. We basically work on civil and political rights issues. But at some stage when we are doing research on basically abuse of children in custody of the law enforcement officials, then we thought, I think we should expand it a little bit beyond the traditional security agencies and basically look into the state responses. So this report is not in a way which we had done, tries to identify the problems which they face. These are, or where we had gone and interviewed the victims and etc. These are basically taken from the cases where some investigation by independent agencies, either the National Human Rights Institutions, whether it's NHRC, Child Rights Committee, or any other institutions authorized by the courts which have already done the investigation. And secondly, where child welfare committees, etc., have already done the investigation. And the focus of this is very simple. The children who are in the juvenile justice institutions, and if we look at the broad definition today under the Juvenile Justice Care and Protection Act, which includes both houses which are manned by, or run by the government as well as those run by the NGOs, the state has the responsibility. When the abuse itself takes place under the care of the state, then of course the culpability, the responsibility is much more than being done outside. I'm not trying to demean the other crimes, but the state has the responsibility. And if we look at this situation, it's actually a very grim situation. We have, I think, after the 14 years, have not done one basic thing in this country. The Juvenile Justice and Care Protection Act came in 2000. We are in 2014. In 2014, we do not even have all the homes which are actually sheltering children registered with the authorities. Is it that difficult to register the houses in any locality, municipality, to register it? It's not a big problem. It can be done very easily by any authorities, but it is not done. And if you read about any reports of sexual abuse in these home institutions, you will find that many of them are actually unregistered. And because they are unregistered, it basically means that the government has not done the task itself. Now, what is the intensity of violations? Very repeated. I would say, I think, of course, there are children's homes which are run very well. But I would say I don't think there is a single home, at least the one which are run by the government, special homes, juvenile homes, observation homes, where children have not been repeatedly sexually abused, either by the staff of the homes or the senior inmates. It's brutal, it's rampant, it takes place on a regular basis. And how do you do with this kind of a situation where the children who are in need of care and protection, because they cannot live in their own homes and houses, or the society itself cannot provide the protection, they go to the state's institutions, thinking that the state itself will provide the protection, and they are subjected to this kind of abuses. Then where is the hope? And I'm only talking about the juvenile justice homes. If we are to go, and we are still in the process of doing this study, the schools which are being, if we want to expand it, tribal schools where children from tribal areas being brought and basically kept in hostels and etc., the kind of abuses which are taking place on a regular basis. It's just mind-boggling. Now, if you look at Delhi itself, I think we have prominent activists who are running themselves this kind of child rights institutions. One run by a former Joint Commissioner of Police. There were serious reports of sexual abuse taking place within that house. What was the accountability? Obviously, there was a serious failure on the part of the administrations. I'm talking about my own colleagues. You had a member of the National Advisory Council who ran a house saying that he will not register under the Juvenile Justice Act because he is running an educational institution, so he should register under the Right to Education Act, which doesn't even exist, which doesn't even provide the legal provisions. Now, if that's the situation in the heart of Delhi, you can imagine what happens outside Delhi. Here you have the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, you have the Delhi High Court, you have the Supreme Court, international media, UN agencies, each and every donor who are providing you fund, and these offenses takes place. You can imagine what happened outside. And if you are to look at this kind of cases, there are children moving out of homes for different reasons. The region where I come from, Northeast, people usually go out to get better education, whether in Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan, or elsewhere. Children as young as 4 years, 5 years, till 14, 15 years. And what kind of solutions we came? We basically came up with an order from the Supreme Court. Basically, children should not be taken out of Manipur. Is it physically possible from the Northeast to, check the border? There is no need for a passport to cross the border. You don't need even inner line permit because they are coming from that side. So how are the police going to monitor it? So it basically shows that from the Supreme Court onwards to the ministry, to the NGOs, many of us who run these homes, we ourselves do not have the capacity to address these problems. Or we are unwilling to address these problems. When we found out, I think there are a couple of problems which we found out. How do we actually stop this? Is it possible? We are talking about all abuse, how to take care of them, how to restore their life. But is there a possibility that we can prevent the sexual abuse in the juvenile justice institutions? I think it is possible, but in one hand, but on the other hand, even if you cannot register the homes in the states available, then how can you even think of preventing the abuses? But I strongly believe that there are still adequate mechanisms. Should the states, should the NGOs, should the government are to be sensitive and serious as to how to address these issues. One of the key issues which we found out, it's very, as I said, the abusers in these homes are basically two sets of people. Either the staffs or owners who run these, owners if it's a private institution, staff if it's run by the government, either they are the one who are committing these sexual abuses or the senior inmates. With respect to senior inmates, it's very clear that you have to segregate children as per their age and at times also nature of the crime to prevent contamination of other children. But I have not found out in any state, including this state, where this segregation takes place. Rather, observation homes, children's homes, special homes, those who have been, who have gone through the entire process in the Juvenile Justice Board, and children who just need care and protection are basically being put in the same house. And because the Juvenile Justice Act is not clear as to what should happen when somebody turns 18, we have many homes in Delhi itself, in Dimapur, in Jammu and Kashmir, Madhya Pradesh, you name any state, where children who needed care and protection when they were 14, 15, they have become 25, 26, 27, 30, 35, still staying in these homes, including in Araspura, in the only juvenile justice home in Jammu and Kashmir. Obviously, when you keep this kind of senior boys or those who have become adult, there is a possibility of crimes being committed by these people. This takes place. And in many places, even the boys and girls are kept together. Boys and girls are kept together. You go to Manipur, you go to Mizoram, with small number of children. You go to Madhya Pradesh, only 3 homes in the entire states of Madhya Pradesh. We have done different kind of states you could find in our websites. Then where, you are basically creating the opportunity for the sexual abuse. And the sad part of it is the Juvenile Justice Act, Care and Protection Act, when it came up in 2000, it sought to provide some kind of protection. And that protection was under Section 35 of the Act, which said that the state government may constitute inspection committees. But if you look at the action of the state, the NGOs, national institutions like the ASCCSA, in the last 14 years, nobody has mentioned about the inspection committees. There are a number of petitions pending in the Supreme Court. We want juvenile justice boards, we want the child welfare committees, we want juvenile police unit. Has anybody moved anything on inspection committees? No. Look at the judgments of the orders of the Supreme Court. There is not a single paragraph relating to inspection committees. And unless you set up these inspection committees, which had to conduct itself in various ways, which I'll come to it, then how are we going to resolve this? So there are no inspection committees. And in fact, when the government actually enacted the rules in 2007, when with respect to the inspection committees, it said that the state governments may set up, but when it came to the rules, they were very specific. It shall. They said, as sub-rule 4 of the section 63 said, the inspection team shall, which is mandatory in the law, consists of a minimum of 5 members with the representation from the state government, the Juvenile Justice Board or Committee, State Commission for Protection of Child Rights, State Human Rights Commission, etc. These committees were never set up anywhere in the states. So since 2010, the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare have enacted this integrated child protection scheme. And in each meetings, they approved projects for juvenile justice institutions, children's homes, NGOs who should get fund. And throughout the year, they approve budgets submitted by the state governments. And in that committee, there is a representative, or there was a representative, there is still one, representative of the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights, who is an Aam Aadmi Party candidate now. I want to be very blunt because these are my colleagues. In none of the meetings in the last 3 years, anybody raised the need for the inspection committees. So it basically means in the last 14 years, none of the juvenile justice homes have been actually inspected by these inspection committees, which the government said they would set up. And because of that, what you have is a conflict with the best interest of the child. When we tried to interview, when we did all these state studies, we could not visit any juvenile justice home without the prior permission of the district magistrate. Whether we went to Una or we went to Gwalior or Aizawl, you had to take the permission in advance. So if somebody was there taking the permission, then at some point in time said, yes, please feel free to come. And obviously, if you go there, everything is fine. You know, it's very difficult unless you provide the environment where children could express themselves. I think Madam was referring how to interview them, you know. Biggest problems in these institutions is, after all, you go and inspect and you come back. But children remain vulnerable. So unless you can talk to them absolutely privately without the presence of any of the officials and by keeping the identity of who said what absolutely confidential, and you cannot do that over and over again, you will never gain the confidence of the children and they will never speak to you. And it's another matter, in some states we also had situations where the members of the child welfare committee members, in the name of providing counseling, they themselves have been accused of the abuses. So where do you go in this kind of a situation? It's extremely, distressing situation, because institutional mechanisms which we are supposed to be in place, we are never put in place. The states are not interested to set up these committees, so they never seek finances. So the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, which approves the budgets, they cannot go beyond the application which has been submitted. And we have a member of the State National Commission for Protection of Child Rights who also don't submit any of the comments in terms of strengthening the inspection committees. So you basically have a situation where the abuses are taking place every day. When it becomes too big, it comes in the news, it's forgotten after 2 days, 3 days, another story comes up, then nothing happens. But we do not have any institutions being held responsible even for non-registering. If you do not register your children's home, obviously if the children are subject to neglect, you could be held responsible. Nobody is held responsible. You will not find anywhere in the country where somebody has been actually held accountable for not registering the case. Yeah, they are child welfare institutions. And there are hundreds and hundreds of child care institutions in the country. And I would say at least 50% of them today are being funded under the Integrated Child Protection Scheme. So if the government is spending the money, obviously there has to be some accountability. It's public money. But the worst is we do not even know how many children are there in these homes, because it's a mobile population. So you have in certain states, we have seen in Manipur, there are children's homes, there are no children. The money has been sanctioned, and each and every year it's being sanctioned. So at times, when you come with this kind of practical problems, you really wonder, actually, what could you do? Because then you realize, then your powers or your activism is very, very limited. It is limited because if the NGOs themselves cannot run homes without sexual abuses, then there is a problem in other areas. And it's a serious problem. And we are not talking about Eregere NGO. I'm talking about a member of a National Advisory Council, which was the super authority over the government. I'm talking about the former Joint Commissioner of Police, who is very well acquainted with law enforcement issues. And if we cannot, the NGOs themselves, run these homes free of sexual abuses, you can imagine what happens in all the juvenile justice homes. And until today, none of us can have access. You can have limited access, but try to find out the truth. Because when you visit these homes, the first suspects are the staff and officials and the senior inmates. And in Karnataka, in fact, the state government banned the child welfare committees from not visiting this area. There is an order saying that the child welfare committee members cannot visit juvenile justice homes without prior permission. So the problem is, I think, as a nation, we don't believe in accountability. We only believe that little bit what we are doing is charity. So the government is happy they are sanctioning so much money at the end of the day. There are very few governments in the region who have adopted such a comprehensive integrated child protection scheme which takes into account all aspects relating to children. Whether you are in Jammu and Kashmir in conflict, Naxal affected areas, or you are abandoned in the streets of Mumbai or Delhi, these programs take care of everything. But nobody will ask questions, and because we do not believe in accountability, it continues. So if we want to prevent it, accountability has to be there, and accountability cannot be done because of the sensitive nature of the issue by NGOs. Seriously, how many NGOs can go and interview victims of child sexual abuse in the juvenile justice system? No, they cannot do it. The only people who can do it are the criminals. They have free access in many areas. But the NGO trying to visit the areas will require permission. So unless these systemic problems we resolve, I don't think we would be able to address the holistic issue of child sexual abuse, which I want to say again is very, very rampant. And we are, if you do this kind of interviews, if you go through it, in the morning, I don't think you feel nice about it. And now we are doing these studies in Chhattisgarh and Orissa, just the tribal educational institutions, Ekalabya Vidyalaya and etc. It's absolutely shocking. It doesn't have to be a charge. If we realize that this child sexual abuse takes place in the churches, if the Pope is willing to speak about it, why can't the government of India speak about it? And unless we ourselves still admit it, we will not resolve it. The first problem is the recognition of the problem itself, that there are rampant sexual abuses in this juvenile justice institution. Unless the government itself recognizes it, then how can you resolve the problem? And at the moment, there is not even this basic recognition. When you went and met the Child Welfare Ministry, they no longer want to see us. They will only give funds to organizations. We didn't go for funds. We don't take any money from the government. That's very clear. But when somebody speaks the truth, if you do not want to address it, there is a problem. Then where would the citizenry go? And that's why I think there is a serious problem. And I don't think, I was thinking, what do I speak today? And in a way, it may sound very pessimistic, but if you were to look at the ground situation, I don't think, we have anything except to be pessimistic. When the judiciary doesn't function, when the national institutions do not function, when NGOs do not function, where would it go? I think that's a serious challenge for us. Thank you.
That was a very insightful and traumatic presentation. I have a question for you. So you've done a lot of studies, and this is actually a question for yourself and anybody in the audience that can answer this as well. You talked about the different governments, the different like state organizations, and the lack of monitoring in the juvenile justice homes. Is there, I know there's a lot of people here from Maharashtra, and you're from a different state, and you've talked about, Chhattisgarh and Orissa. Is there a model state, a best practice, a good state that has implemented this, so we can then take that to the other states and, show them the best practices or shame them and say, let's adopt this?
No, I think it should have been ideally by the NGOs, but very well-known NGOs, when you serve at a certain level, when you cannot run it, then of course, it's a problem. So I would say there is no model state. In fact, all the states have failed. If you look at the report, you will find the website, and you can find, in the websites of the Ministry of Women and Child Welfare, Child Development. Go into the PAV website, Project Approval Board, and look at the minutes. Minutes after minutes for all these states. Nobody has ever mentioned that there is something called child inspection, inspection committees. They do not even exist in the vocabulary of in the lexicon, in the lingua franca of the ministry or the NGOs. Inspection committees do not exist. But inspection committees are the primary mandate holder to inspect it. So if you look at the states, I don't think there is a single state. And I explained it Delhi. Delhi is a small, it's an overgrown village, if you want to say, in terms of the area, maybe. Then if you cannot have the best model there, then how are you going to have in a huge area like Maharashtra? Because Delhi, you have everything out there. And at least if you're an NGO, you should be careful about your reputation, your funder. And people don't care about it. If the NGOs do not care about this, then obviously why do you blame the government? Because he will be transferred in any case from one ministry to another ministry in maximum 3 years' time.
Sir, I'm from Maharashtra, and I'm very proud to say that we do have an inspection committee appointed by the Bombay High Court, and we also have periodic inspections, qualitative inspections every month by the district officer. And I may say, without the consent of the government, that ours is certainly the best model. Maharashtra. You are most welcome to visit all our homes any day now.
Thank you. I'll take that offer. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Hi. I think I've said already, my name's Christelle, and I run a couple of children's homes, actually, one for pregnant teenagers, one for boys also. Currently, we only have 6 boys in the home, but previously we had up to 15. And this was quite a few years ago, but I used to go every day to this home, Monday to Saturday, a couple of hours in the morning before they went to school, a couple of hours once they came back from school. And I thought it was the perfect children's home until I found out that there was sexual abuse going on in my home amongst the boys. So the oldest was 17, and he had abused a 12-year-old who had abused a 9-year-old who had abused a 7-year-old. And it went on like this at various levels. It was quite, it was not penetrative, but touching was going on. And once it got to the lowest, the youngest child, the 12-year-old suddenly realized that that was partly due to him. And he couldn't see it happening to a child that was younger than him. And therefore they started speaking about it amongst themselves, and that's how my staff came to hear what had happened. Actually, the 17-year-old, we confronted him, and I think he'd just passed his 18th birthday, and so we actually gave him a choice of going to the police and him going to prison or going to therapy, and we brought his family in, spoke to his family. This is the way we dealt with it. At that time, he went back to his family, and we made sure that he went to see a psychologist and followed therapy for some time. Then within the home, it was like, well, how do we separate? Do I put these children in cages? How do you separate, like you were saying, the ages, to put the children in different spaces? We don't have that many doors to lock. You know, I mean, how do you separate the children? You're talking about older boys to younger boys, but I've had 5-year-olds initiating things because they have previously been abused by a grandfather before they came to us. So it's very, very complicated within an institution to manage it, and I would love advice from anybody, because...
No, I think it's a very complicated, especially when the resource crunch is there. But I think what I was referring to is that the state itself now has at least taken the responsibility. So I can understand that you have the resource crunch because you run yourself. But when the government itself runs the children's home, observation homes, then the juvenile homes, and the special homes, then of course the state has to ensure segregation. I mean, what I was referring to is that, you know, I mean, of course there will be problems. But even in cases where the state has the resources or has the capacity, they should do it, or at least they should allocate more financial resources.
But and how do you separate a 9-year-old from a 7-year-old from a 5-year-old? I mean,
well, the houses have to be separate, as simple as that. It's not the rooms which have to be separate. I mean, in many states they are trying to do it, to keep the houses separate. It's very risky to keep, say, between 14 years to 18 years with the boys below that. It's extremely risky. Mm-hmm. And when we went in, I think in Orissa, and the elder boys, we are actually in league with the superintendent. Sure. I mean, you have to ensure that these offenses takes place very regularly. So if you are sensitive about it, then of course, now resource crunch, of course, it's very dear. It's there, but I'm not talking about segregation in terms of rooms. I think segregation in terms of the houses. You know, I mean, sometimes also it's very risky if it's for genuine care and protection to keep children who just need care and protection because of the family situation with the children who have been convicted. You have to prevent criminal contamination if you look at it. And the more it is, better it is. I mean, if you look at the UN principles, there is a possibility of that. But where I think the problem is the state itself is not allocating adequate resources. And most of the resources actually only goes for human resources expenses. They never look at the CWC members in Madhya Pradesh. They are given 250 rupees per sitting. It doesn't even cover the auto rickshaw fare if he or she lives outside. So how do you expect a CWC to function effectively And what is happening is basically they are just appointing somebody without creating adequate infrastructure. So that also runs into the homes. So, sir, I'll come back to you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. That was interesting. One of my students had undertaken a research on peer-inflicted sexual abuse in juvenile institutions. This was several years back, and one of the findings that we wanted to discover how peer-inflicted abuse took place. But one of the findings that was really eye-opening was the institutional structure itself that perpetrated abuse. So when the child enters the institution, the child's identity is taken away. The child has no belongings, no place to keep his or her belongings. In this particular institution, the children who were in the institution for a longer time had what they called a peti. So there used to be a lot of barter among children who didn't have a peti, a box, and children who had a peti, saying that I will give you the peti and you need to give me your anus. Or children who worked in the kitchen, just to, all know what kind of food and things like that. But if there were puris made on a particular day, so children in the kitchen, so power operated in a different way and across the institution and not just in age. So this whole issue of separation and segregation is alone not going to address the complexity. Also, abuse may not necessarily take place but it could take place in many other spaces within that are commonly inhabited by, both younger, older children who have more power in terms of kitchen hai, peti hai, ye hai, wo hai, they have access to the superintendent and the caretakers. So there are many, and I haven't come up with a solution to say how does one address these structural problems when we are talking about juvenile institutions.
I think, the separation is only one of the issues. At least one door you close, and it is already provided in the rules. Then if the government itself has enacted the rules saying that they will provide for separation as per the age and sex, at least they should do that. In many states, what I am saying, we also have children, boys and girls together. You can imagine how risky it is. And so when the state makes certain laws, of course, in India we never examine the cost implications. But any law has its own cost implication, not only for the judiciary, but for effective implementation, and that's never taken care of. So what's the point of saying that the children's home be segregated? And tomorrow, I am sure if somebody moves an application before the Supreme Court saying that this is the rules provide, this is the way to prevent it, and I am sure the state itself is directed by the court, they will do it. I think, so the separation may be one of the ways to address it, because we found it very problematic when we went to R.S. Pura juvenile homes, because we are doing a study on Kashmir, and he was already 24 years old. You don't feel comfortable, to leave certain children with that fellow. No, he might be absolutely innocent. But, just the ambience there, the atmosphere there is not there. And the superintendent is only one person. Possibly doesn't even move beyond his or her room. And there is also possibility of risk of violence in many situations on the superintendent. There are lots of problems which come up. So it's a huge and complex problem. But we have to recognize that these kind of abuses are taking place rampantly. Yes, sir.
My name is Amit Sen. I'm a child psychiatrist working in Delhi.
Yes.
To start with, I think over the last 2 days deliberations, I think what has emerged are lots of pockets and institutions which are doing excellent work. And I think we have to start with recognize it and begin to use those as models. Many of them are from Maharashtra, so I take your point that indeed Maharashtra, if there is any model state, perhaps Maharashtra it is. Maybe people from Karnataka might beg to differ. I know there are lots of things that are not happening properly in Delhi, but I'd like to share a model that we use in a NGO called Salam Balak Trust, which works with street children. And over the last 11 years, we have been running a mental health program for children over there. In running the child mental health program or the mental health program in SBT, we have learned that if we do individual work, group work, preventive work, life skills education, which we have been doing, then the incidence of such child abuse or any kind of, dysfunction in children diminishes significantly. That's what we've learned, right? Now, that doesn't mean it's going to go away completely. I mean, it's not something that we'll eradicate from society. It's not like polio, isn't it? I mean, it will remain in some form or the other. But by doing these kind of systemic changes, we can bringing about systemic changes, we can minimize and also become much more aware. So no doubt in Salam Balak Trust, every now and then, we still have, incidences where an older child is going to abuse a younger child. It depends on what systems do you have to deal with it. So we have a child abuse protocol, which we've developed over the last so many years, where every point is laid down. Who gets to know first? Who takes the disclosure? Who are the people who need to know? How do you maintain confidentiality? Who does the therapy? All of that is put in place. And a lot of sexuality workshops begin to happen from the child when the children are as young as 5 years old. So they have it in a certain form at 5, then they have it at 8, then they have it when they reach teenage, and all that empowers children to make right choices. So I have strong reservations again, boundaries and segregating people, because ultimately we are looking at integrating children, as if they are like families. I mean, we can then argue that child sexual abuse is very, very common in families too. So are we then going to say that children who have, the moment they step into adolescence, should have other houses, other rooms? Not at all. We want them to grow up as brothers and sisters, and that kind of intermingling with some boundaries, some logical ways of dealing with issues of growing up, etc., have to be worked out. So I think the models have to be different in different settings, and I'll be very happy if anybody else wants to share some of our experiences in SPT as to how to build a system within an organization. In a state, to do with legislation and all of that is much bigger, of course. We've learned over the last few days, or last couple of days, that it's a humongous thing. There's no questioning that. But there are models that are good, and I appreciate a lot of things that I've heard, and I'm really very pleasantly surprised with so much of the good work that's going on, and I think we need to hold on to that in the last 2 days.
Well, I think there is no dispute that the NGOs are supposed to, in any given day, better than the governments. But we have to realize, we have to realize that the majority of the children in this country are not in the custody of the NGOs which are rights-based, which have the reputation as much as Salam Balak Trust or a couple or sometimes Hawk Center for Child Rights or any other organizations. These are premier NGOs in the country, so they are expected. But when you go into the deeper, you have to realize that the possibly 99% of the children are in the custody of either the government or NGOs which do not have the rights-based, possibly do not even have the exposure, they do not even have the resources, they do not even have an advisor who will help them understand what is child psychiatry. So I think we are not looking into the smaller solutions. If we have to find a solution, first of all, in fact, this report is what we focus, we have to find solutions in special homes, observation homes, of the ones run by the government. And that is where if we are not able to do that, then of course we will never reach out. The NGOs, of course, there is no doubt the NGOs have excellent models, but this usually doesn't translate into the government.
There is another organization, an NGO who has got into some of the juvenile justice homes in Delhi called Manas Foundation. Do you have any knowledge about what their work is like?
Yeah, let me not comment on them. Anyway. Yes, ma'am.
In Goa, we do have the district inspection committees set up under the JJ Act. But what we found was that they were not moving. Even we were part of one of the district inspection committees, so we repeatedly wrote letters saying that, no inspections are taking place. Then the problem was that the collector was put as one of the members of the team, and the collector never has time. So then they put the additional collector, but then that also did not work. Then the State Commission for Protection of Child Rights came up with a solution, and block inspection teams were formed with the CDPOs of the area on the inspection teams. So I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. In Assam, they put I'll just finish it. They put the district and session judge. He even doesn't have the time to basically hear the juvenile justice cases, and you have put him as the chairman of the inspection committee. And the district magistrate in this country is burdened with everything, from NRAGA to inspection. And obviously there's a human capacity problem. And because we put so much on, one particular officer, that actually nothing moves. And that's, I think, a serious problem.
But in Maharashtra, the civil judges are doing the inspection.
And yet there is so much abuse reported in Maharashtra.
Okay. Thank you.